as yourself. You know, what if he meant our actual neighbor? I think he did. Of course, he told the story of the Good Samaritan, but I think he meant everybody's our neighbor, especially the ones that live close to us. The problem with this, what Jesus said, we're very familiar with it, but what we've done is we made bumper stickers out of it to put on our car. We talk about it a lot, and we put it on T-shirts to wear around. But you know, we don't actually practice it. We don't practice a plan that could change the world. I'm still reading the article. The reality is, however, now listen to this one and see if it is your situation. The reality is that the majority of Christians and non-Christians don't even know the names of most of their neighbors. This May, I will have lived in Oak Park subdivision just outside of Youngsville for 6 years. I know 3 families. The one straight across in front of me, the one directly to my right, the one directly to my left. The rest of them, I have no idea who they are. It's just as much my fault as it is theirs. Paul, in his wisdom given to him by God, has given us some very good ways to get along with our neighbor and to get to know our neighbor. So let's take a look at them. I keep opening that, I'm already taking it out. Christians and their neighbors. Paul gave us 7 things, and I'm going to be quick with them, that we need to do to be a good neighbor, to get along with our neighbors, and to share Christ with our neighbors. First thing he said is this: Christians are going to suffer persecution because we're Christians. You see, a lot of non-Christians don't really like to be around Christians. And they do a lot of talking about us. Some of them think we're out of our mind to believe in God. But Christians, Paul says, are to pray for those who persecute them. Now, by persecute, we don't mean that they try to harm you physically or anything, but they might make fun of you. When you want to talk to them about coming to church or about Jesus, they'll brush you off. When Christians are hurt, Paul says, when they're insulted, I've been insulted because I'm a Christian, when they're badly treated, we are to look at the example of Jesus Christ. When he was crucified on the cross, what's his most famous statement? By the way, Jesus said 7 things while he was on the cross. I'm going to preach on that soon. But the most famous one was this: Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Well, when people brush us off or insult us or laugh at us because we're Christians, they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand how angry that makes God. So we're supposed to pray for them. Stephen, the first Christian martyr, was stoned to death for preaching the gospel. And he did the same thing Jesus did as he lay dying. Stephen said that he saw the skies open and he saw the Son of God sitting beside God the Father. And so Stephen prayed and he said, Father, forgive the ones who are killing me. Forgive them. Don't hold this to their account. So Paul tells us the first thing we are to do is forgive our enemies for the wrongs they do us and pray for them. Now, as a human being, I'm going to tell you, that's not easy to do, is it? When somebody wrongs you, it's hard to forgive them. I was a school teacher for 30 years. I've been called, you couldn't believe the names that I got called sometimes. I'm talking about the parents. The students could be even worse. So Paul says, when people persecute you, pray for them, forgive them. Secondly, Paul says, we're to rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Few things in the world bring people close together more than sorrow. When you cry with someone over some sorrow in their life, there's no better bond of friendship and love between two people than crying together. I've been in the ministry now for 22 years. I have been at the bedside of people when they died, standing there with their spouse and their children, and we all cried together. I've been to people's houses when they rejoiced, when things were great in their life, and we all laughed together. But you might be surprised at this. It's easier to cry with somebody than it is to be happy with them. You might say, well, that doesn't sound right. Well, the reason that that's true is we human beings have trouble being happy for other people when something good happens to them and it has not happened to us. Mega Millions, $1.35 billion was won Friday night by a man or woman in Maine. Now, I've never been to Maine, never had a desire to go there, especially in the wintertime. But if I had won $1.35 billion, and I came to church and told you folks about it, you'd say, well, great, I'm so happy for you. No, you're not happy for me. You wish you'd have won it. Well, you hope I'll give you some of it. I'd be the same way. You're happy for them a little bit, but you're jealous of them a lot. So it's actually easier to cry with people than it is to be happy with them. It takes a real loving person. It takes a person that loves other people like Jesus loves people to really take joy in another person's good fortune. You've really got to be close to Christ to do that. It's kind of like you're working somewhere and there's an opening where you can move up and make more money. And they interview you and want somebody else where you work. And the other person gets the job. You tell them, I'm so happy for you. Isn't that human nature? But Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice and be true about it. Be truly happy for them. To have that kind of love, folks, we've got to be very close to Jesus. Thirdly, Paul tells us live in harmony with everybody. Harmony means try to get along with everybody. You see, we Christians need to be a band of brothers and a band of sisters. For a church, any church, to draw in new people, and for a church to keep the ones we've already got, we must show them love, kindness, and goodwill. I talked to a member of this church the other day who's been a member here quite a while. And this person told me that they came from another church. They didn't like some things there too much, and they decided to come to Raleigh Road and give it a try. And they said they knew the first Sunday they were here, this was the place, because everybody was so friendly and loving and truly were glad to see them. Listen, folks, when you're lying to somebody, they know it. I became an expert at it. When you teach 8th graders for 30 years, you can look in their eyes and tell whether they're telling you the truth or not. You know, most of the time they weren't, so I could guess when I didn't know for sure, and usually I was right. When problems enter a church, or when problems enter between two or more neighbors in a neighborhood, when we allow that to happen, you're not going to get anything done for Christ. See, remember, as Christians, we are left with the Great Commission to share Jesus with others. But what the devil wants to do in church, especially when things are going well, he wants to stir up trouble. And he wants to stir up trouble in your personal life, at work. You ever had somebody at work that you had words with, or you had problems with, or you just didn't like them, or they didn't like you? Well, let me tell you, there's somebody behind that. And it's not God. The devil loves to stir up trouble in church, at work, at home. And we've got to avoid that with all our power. Once again, how can we have the strength and the resolve not to argue and fuss and get where we don't like people? We need to get close to Jesus. The closer you are to Christ and the more Christ-like life you live, the less is the temptation to do that. Plus, the closer you get to Christ, the devil's going to leave you alone most of the time because he doesn't want to be anywhere near Jesus. So try to live in harmony. And that's not easy to do sometimes. It's work. But try your best to live in harmony. You remember what your mama's told you, don't you? If you can't say something good about somebody, what? Don't say anything at all. Stop gossiping about your neighbors and the people you work with. Because I'm here to tell you, it happened to me. It'll get back to them. You ever had this happen or seen it happen? You tell somebody something you heard, and one of your friends at work, well, you know what I heard about so-and-so? And you tell them about it during lunch, and you swear them to silence. And before the end of your work day, everybody in the place knows it. Especially the one you said it about. Live in harmony, Paul says. Number 4, Christians are not to be snobs, walking around with our nose in the air. We're going to heaven and you're not. That's the way the Pharisees and Sadducees were in Jesus' day. We're not to be snobs over anything. But we tend to do it. See, there are people in this world who are obviously bad sinners. Because they do bad things all the time. And it's easy for a Christian to kind of sit back and stick their nose in the air and say, well, God loves me, but he doesn't love you. Folks, we forget something. 2 things. I want you to keep this in your mind. God judges people differently than we do. And only you and God know what your relationship with him is. Everybody else is just guessing. I did a funeral one time of a young man when I was pastor of a church down near Charlotte. And he had been shot and killed robbing a convenience store. And his, I didn't know it, but his uncle was chairman of my deacon board at the church. And he, young man, he's about 22 or 23. He didn't go to church anywhere. And his father called his brother, the chairman of the deacons. He'd heard me preach a couple of funerals, asked what I'd do at the boy's funeral. Well, he'd been in trouble since he was 12 years old. Drugs, alcohol, stealing things. Kicked in it out of school a bunch of times. Parents threw him out of the house. Bad news, right? God certainly couldn't love anybody like that, could you? They asked me to do the funeral. I'm just being sarcastic there, of course. They asked me to do the funeral. And folks, when you do funerals of a Christian, they're easy to do in the fact that you know exactly what to say. No funeral is easy, but you know exactly what to say. But this guy, I didn't know what to say. When I was at Campbell Divinity School, the professors we had chapel every Tuesday, 10 o'clock, and the professors would preach. We'd sing a bunch of music. Randy, they always wanted me to sing. I don't understand it. And then one of the professors would preach. And the dean, Mike Cogdell, preached a sermon on one Sunday. And he said this: let's let God decide who's going to heaven. He said, we might think we know, but we don't. Because a person's salvation is between them and God. I thought about that as I was trying to figure out how to preach that young man's sermon. And that's what I did. Because, you know, now the place had a lot of people there because that was a well-known family in the community. And some of his friends were there. I don't know if they let them out of jail for 2 hours to go to the funeral or what, but they were there. And they looked the part now. They really looked the part of bad guys. But they came to his funeral, which was a very good thing. And the way I preached the funeral was this. I know every one of you here thinks that, I forgot his name, I'll say Bob. I know everybody here thinks Bob, because of the trouble he's been in, has gone to hell. And I said, I didn't know him. He may have. But I'm here to tell you this. We don't know if he did or not, because at some time in his life, he may have gave his heart and soul to Jesus Christ. And only he and God know that. So let's let God decide who's going to heaven. I told him about my professor preaching that. That did his parents a tremendous amount of good, because they told me after the service, we had no hope when we came in. Now we have a little. So folks, we don't know our conduct fair for everybody to see. Paul knew that a Christian's conduct, the way we live every day, he knew that not only has to be good, but it must look good too. Listen, think about that now. Paul said a Christian's conduct should be good and it should look good. Why do we want it to look good? Because we want the people who are not Christians to see how a Christian lives their life. Because if we say we're Christians and we go out in the world and we don't act like Christians, there's this name we're called. What is it? Hypocrites. Folks, there are a lot of Christian hypocrites. Paul says if you're going to talk the talk, walk the walk. Number 6, Paul says, this is my favorite one, we are to live at peace with everybody. But notice that Paul adds 2 qualifications or 2 buts to that. First, he says we are to live at peace with everybody if it's possible. I want to tell you something about Christians. Christians are not wimps. Christians are to try to get along and be peaceful with everybody. But if somebody steps over the line, you don't have to stand there and let them go but so far. When Jesus went to the temple, and the money changers and the people who were selling the lambs and the other animals for sacrifice, when they were doing all that and causing all this ruckus in the outer court of the temple, did Jesus just go by and say, man, I tell you, I hate to see this. And then grab the disciples and go down and get a burger? No. What did he do? He drove them out, didn't he? He drove them out of the temple. And he didn't do it real nicely. He kicked them out physically. Christianity does not mean that you have a tolerance for sin. Oh, well, you shouldn't be doing that, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. We Christians have to take a stand against sin. One reason that every church in Vance County is not packed every Sunday is Christians are not taking a stance against sin. We're just keeping our mouths shut and say, well, I don't want to get involved in that. We live in the everything goes culture, don't we? When I was pastor of Calvary Baptist Church in Dunn, before Brenda and I moved back up this way, there was a couple that came and wanted to join the church. They were faithful members. They'd been coming to Sunday school, preaching, Bible study, faithful members. And they told me, so we think we're going to join the church next Sunday. And I said, well, let's go to my office. So we went down there and sat down and talked. They were not married. They were living together. And I told them, I said, I would love to have you as members of this church, but I cannot, and the church will not vote you in because you're living together. That's a sin against God. I said, now, if you weren't living together and y'all were just dating, we could admit you separately. But the fact that you're living together, I just can't look the other way. Now, they had a choice. Young couple, about 35, both of them. They could have got mad and left our church. But instead, several weeks later, we had a wedding. And they got married, and the next week they came down and joined our church. Folks, Christians cannot tolerate sin, and it is our job to speak out against it. We ought to be patient and kind always with other people. But if someone crosses the line, we have a right to put them in their place. Now, I didn't say, now, don't take me wrong, I didn't say your neighbor is watering his lawn and a little bit of water is hitting on your grass, so you go over there and beat him up. I didn't say that, did I? I said when someone crosses the line. Now, when you're a Christian, they have to do a lot to cross the line. But people will. And you don't have to take it when they cross the line. You can put them in their place. Now, but nobody will take this wrong. There are a lot of peaceful ways to put people in their place. I'm not telling you to be violent with anyone. I'm just saying, when people cross the line, you have a right, as Jesus did when he drove those money changers out, to stop. I hope that never happens to you. It's happened to me a few times. Told a man one time who hadn't come to church in a long time that I missed him. Saw him at one of my son's Little League games. And boy, he stopped and told me off. Told me he never wanted to hear me talk about coming to church anymore. And he was just lighting in me, and a big crowd was gathering all around. You know. So fine. I stood there and listened about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I just... Still saying the same thing. I took about 3 more steps, and I stopped, and I did just like I said I was going to. Well, Jesus was with me because he was about 6'4", 230. But there's a sad ending to this story. 2 years later, he died of a massive heart attack. And I did the funeral. And I don't know whether he was saved or not. Finally, Paul says we are to keep all thoughts of revenge to ourselves. It gives us 3 reasons for that. Paul says vengeance belongs to God, not us. Only God has the right to judge others. Now, take that just like it said. We do not have the right as Christians to take vengeance on anyone in any way. So, Bob goes behind your back at work and tells the boss something you said, and it gets you in a lot of trouble. If you're a Christian, you do not have the right to take vengeance on Bob. Now, you do have the right not to send him a Christmas card. I remember one of our professors said one day at Campbell, Jesus said for us to love everybody, but he didn't say we had to like everybody. That just opened up a whole new world for me. He said you're supposed to love them and want them to become Christians and go to heaven like Jesus loved them, but you don't have to like them. And then he said you don't have to send them a Christmas card. There are people in the world like that. We're to love them like Jesus did, but we might not like them. Secondly, treating people with kindness rather than vengeance. Paul said it's like heaping coals of fire on their head. It will make them ashamed of their actions. Now, that doesn't happen every time right away. Sometimes it takes a while for it to happen. But the best thing you can do with somebody who is insulting to you or treating you ugly is be nice to them. We have an expression for that today. Now, it's not in the Bible, but we said, kill them with what? Kindness. Is that easy to do? No. What I'm telling you today, most of these are not easy to do, but Jesus commands us to do these. Kill them with kindness, Paul says. And finally, Paul says we are not to meet evil with evil. We're not to meet hatred with hatred. A famous American once said, I will not allow any man to lower me by causing me to hate him. I will not allow anybody to make me hate them. Sometimes for that to happen, you have to get away from that person. But you know the only way to destroy your enemy so he won't be your enemy anymore is by making him your friend. When I was, I'll say this and then I'm done. When I was training at what is now Barton College, they called it Atlantic Christian. When I went there, I was training to be a school teacher. We had to take psychology of dealing with people. And one of the things we were told is, if you have to get on a student, crack down on them. And as school teachers, you have to do that sometimes. Because you have to let that 14, 15-year-old know, I run this class, you don't. Once they realize that, you don't have much trouble. But when you have to get on a student, they get mad at you, don't they? Because the main reason they're mad at you is because you embarrassed them in front of friends. We were taught that after you do that, as soon as possible, when the chance presents itself, reestablish a relationship with that kid. Don't let it linger like that. Go back to them and now at first they may not want to talk to you. Keep on doing it. The only way to stop your enemy from being your enemy is to make him or her your friend. And you got to be real humble to do that. And to be humble, oh, he's got to be Jesus Christ. Because if we don't know Jesus, the devil is going to be driving what we do. And there's nothing humble about Satan. So Paul says if we follow these things, we'll not only get along with our neighbors, we'll get along with the people we work with everybody in our family. Anybody have somebody, you don't, please don't raise your hand. Does anybody have somebody in their family that you don't really get along with? Jesus said, if you're a Christian, the only way to make that better is to reach out and try to get along with them. Now, suppose you reach out to them and they reject you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to be your friend. Have you done what God demands you to do? Yes. Now, you can try again if you want to. Might reject you again. But God tells us don't even pray. If you know you get ready to pray and you know somebody's got something against you or you got something against them, before you even pray, go to them and make it right. So your prayer will be heard. So I've given you some hard things to do today to get along with your neighbors and to get along with the people you work with, people in your family and so on. But I want you to remember, this is not John Gupton telling you to do it. This is Jesus Christ telling you that you are to act like a Christian and do what a Christian does. Let us pray. Dear Lord, in this old world we live in, we are put in so many situations where people insult us, stab us in the back, talk about us. Sometimes it's because we're a Christian. Sometimes it's some other reason. And Lord, our human instinct, pushed by Satan, is to retaliate. If somebody says something ugly to me, I say something ugly to them. If somebody does something wrong to me, I do something wrong to them. That's the way of the world, but it's not the way of God. It's not the way of Jesus Christ. And we who are Christians are to strive every day of our life until the end of it to live and be more like Jesus. So, Lord, these are 7 hard things to do, but there's 7 powerful things for getting along with people. Lord, give us the strength to practice them in our daily lives. In Jesus' holy name I pray. Amen.
Our invitation hymn this morning is hymn number 503, Now I Belong to Jesus. Let's stand together as we sing. Jesus, my Lord, will love me forever. From him no power of evil can sever. He gave his life to ransom my soul. Now I belong to him. Now I belong to Jesus. Jesus belongs to me. Not for the years of time alone, but for eternity. Once I was lost in sin's degradation. Jesus came down to bring me salvation, lifted me up from sorrow and shame. Now I belong to him. Now I belong to Jesus. Jesus belongs to me. Not for the years of time alone, but for eternity.
Well, Pastor, what do I do with this person? Every time I see them, they say something bad to me, something insulting. I just can't get along with them. Just stay away from them. As much as you can. But pray for them. That your relationship with them will become better. Stay away. There are people in the world you have to just stay away. Hopefully not in your life. Thank you for coming today. We're so glad to see you. Let's continue to pray for our sick folks so they can get straightened out and feel better again. Let's continue to pray for the way you live and the lost in our church. As soon as we know who the service will be, we will get it out there. Let's pray. Father, go with us now as we leave your house. We're going out of that world, dear Lord, where Satan rules. In fact, I have no doubt that Satan was sitting on one of these pews today, trying his best to put in the mind of every person here. But your pastor just told you that Jesus said, you really don't have to do that. It's just a suggestion. Lord, help us to tell Satan to get out of our lives if we're going to live for Jesus. Go with us now, Father. Keep us healthy this week. Keep us safe. And bring us back to your house at the next appointed time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Just a reminder.